Book 9. Friendship. 1. Friends with dissimilar aims. In all friendships of friends with dissimilar aims, proportion equalizes and preserves the friendship. As has been said, in political friendship, for instance, the cobbler receives a worthy exchange for his shoes, and so do the weaver and the others. Here, money is supplied as a common measure. Everything is related to this and measured by it. In erotic friendships, however, sometimes the lover charges that he loves the beloved deeply and is not loved in return. And in fact, perhaps he has nothing lovable in him. The beloved, however, often charges that previously the lover was promising him everything, and now fulfills none of his promises. These sorts of charges arise whenever the lover loves his beloved for pleasure, while the beloved loves his lover for utility, and they do not both provide these. For if the friendship has these causes, it is dissolved whenever they do not get what they were friends for each was not found of the other himself, but only of what the other had, which was unstable. That is why the friendships are also unstable. Friendship of character, however, is friendship in itself, and is stable, endures, as has been said. Friends quarrel when the results they get are different from those they want, for when someone does not get what he aims at, it is like getting nothing. It is like the person who promised the player a reward, and a greater reward the better he played. In the morning, when the player asked him to keep his promise, the other said he had paid pleasure in return for pleasure. Now, if this was what each of them had wished, it would be enough. But if one wished for delight, and the other for profit, and one has got his delight, and the other has not made his profit, things are not right in their common dealings, for each person sets his mind on what he finds he needs, and this will be his aim when he gives what he gives. But who should fix the worth of a benefit? The giver or the one who has already received it? Surely the latter, for the giver would seem to entrust the judgment to the one who has received. This is what Protagoras is said to have done, for whenever he taught anything at all, he used to tell the pupil to estimate how much the knowledge was worth, and that was the amount he used to collect. In such cases, however, some people prefer the rule payment to a man. But those who take the money first, and then do nothing that they said they would do, because their promises were excessive, are reasonably accused, since they do not carry out what they agreed to. And presumably, the sophists are compelled to make excessive promises, because no one would pay them money for the knowledge they really have. Therefore, they take the payment, and then do not do what they were paid to do, and reasonably are accused. But where no agreement about services is made, friends who give services because of the friend himself are not open to accusation, as we have said, since this what the friendship that accords with virtue is like, and the return should accord with the decision of the original giver, since decision is proper to a friend and to virtue. And it would seem that the same sort of return should also be made to those who have shared philosophy in common with us, for its worth is not measured by money, and no equivalent honor can be paid. But it is enough, presumably, to do what we can, as we also do towards gods and parents. If the giving is not of this sort, but on some specified condition, presumably the repayment must be, ideally, what each of them thinks according with the worth of the gift. But if they do not agree on this, it would seem not merely necessary, but also just, for the party who benefits first to fix the repayment. For if the other receives in return as much benefit as the first received, or as much as he would have paid for the pleasure, he will have got the worthy return from him. For this is also how it appears in buying and selling, and in some cities there are actually laws that prohibit legal actions in voluntary bargains. on the assumption that if we have trusted someone, we must dissolve the community with him on the same terms on which we formed it. The law does this because it supposes that it is more just for the recipient to fix repayment than for the giver to fix it. For usually those who have something and those who want it do not put the same price on it, since to the giver what he owns and what he is giving appears to be worth a lot, but nonetheless the return is made in the amount fixed by the initial recipient. Presumably, however, the price must be not what it appears to be worth when he has got it, but the price he put on it before he got it. 2. Conflicts between different types of friendships. Here are some other questions that raise a puzzle. Must you accord authority in everything to your father and obey him in everything? Or must you trust the doctor when you are sick, and should you vote for a military expert to be general? Similarly, should you do a service for your friend rather than for an excellent person, and return a favor to a benefactor rather than do a favor for a companion, if you cannot do both? Surely it is not easy to define all these matters exactly, since they include many differences of all sorts, in importance and unimportance, and in the fine and necessary. Still, it is clear that not everything should be rendered to the same person, and usually we should return favors rather than do favors for our companions, just as we should return a loan to a creditor rather than give to a companion. But presumably this is not always true either. If, for instance, someone has ransomed you from pirates, should you ransom him in return, no matter who he is? Or, if he does not need to be ransomed, but asks for his money back, should you return it? Or should you ransom your father instead? For it seems that you should ransom your father rather than even yourself. As has been said, then, we should, generally speaking, return what we owe. But if making a gift to B outweighs returning the money to A by being finer or more necessary, we should incline to making the gift to B instead. For sometimes even a return of a previous favor is not fair, whenever the original giver knows he is benefiting an excellent person, but the recipient would be returning the benefit to someone he thinks is vicious. For sometimes you should not even lend in return to someone who has lent to you, for he expected repayment when he lent to a decent person, whereas you have no hope of it from a bad person. If that is really so, then the demand for reciprocity is not fair. And even if it is not so, but you think it is so, your refusal of the demand seems not at all strange, as has often been said. Then, arguments about ways of being affected and about actions are no more definite than their subject matter. Clearly, then, we should not render the same things to everyone, and we should not render everything to our fathers, just as we do not make all our sacrifices to Zeus. And since different things should be rendered to parents, brothers, companions, and benefactors, we should accord to each what is proper and suitable. This is what actually appears to be done. For instance, kinsfolk are the people invited to weddings, since they share the same family, and hence share in actions that concern it. And for the same reason, it is thought that kinsfolk, more than anyone, ought to come to funerals. It seems that we ought to supply means of support to parents more than anyone, for we suppose that we owe them this, and that it is finer to supply those who are the causes of our being than to supply ourselves in this way. And we should accord honor to our parents just as we should to the gods, but not every sort of honor, for we should not accord the same honor to a father as to a mother, nor accord them the honor due to a wise person or a general. We should accord a father's honor to a father, and likewise a mother's to a mother. We should accord to every older person the honor befitting age, by standing up, giving up seats, and so on. With companions and brothers we should speak freely, and have everything in common. To kinsfolk, fellow tribesmen, fellow citizens, and all the rest, we should always try to accord with what is proper, and should compare what belongs to each, as befits closeness of relation, virtue, or usefulness. Admittedly, the comparison is easier with people of the same kind, and more difficult with people of different kinds. But the difficulty is no reason to give up the task. On the contrary, we should determine as far as we can. 3. Dissolution of friendships. There is also a puzzle about dissolving or not dissolving friendships with friends who do not remain the same. In the case of friends for utility or pleasure, perhaps there is nothing strange in dissolving the friendship whenever they are no longer pleasant or useful, for they were friends of pleasure or utility, and if these give out, it is reasonable not to love. We might, however, accuse a friend if he really liked us for utility or pleasure, and pretended to like us for our character. For, as we said at the beginning, friends are most at odds when they are not friends in the way they think they are. And so, if we mistakenly suppose we are loved for our character, when our friend is doing nothing to suggest this, we must hold ourselves responsible. But if we are deceived by his pretense, we are justified in accusing him, even more justified than in accusing debasers of the currency, to the extent that his evil doing debases something more precious. But if we accept a friend as a good person, and then he becomes bad, and seems so, should we still love him? Surely we cannot. If not everything, but only the good is lovable, and the bad is not lovable, and ought not to be loved, for we ought neither to love the bad, nor to become similar to a base person. And we have said that similar is friend to similar. Then, should the friendship be dissolved at once, as soon as the friend becomes bad? Surely not with every sort of person, but only with an incurably bad person. If someone can be set right, we should try harder to rescue his character than his property, insofar as character is both better and more proper to friendship. Still, the friend who dissolves the friendship seems to be doing nothing strange, for he was not the friend of a person of this sort, and hence if the friend has altered, and he cannot save him, he leaves him. Now, but if one friend has stayed the same, and the other has become more decent, and far excelled his friend in virtue, should the better person still treat the other as a friend? Surely he cannot. This becomes clear in a wide separation, such as we find in friendships beginning in childhood. For if one friend still thinks as a child, while the other becomes a man of the best sort, how could they still be friends, if they neither approve of the same things, nor find the same things enjoyable or painful? For they do not even find it so in their life together, and without that they cannot be friends, since they cannot live together. We have discussed this. Then, should the better person regard the other as though he had never become his friend? Surely he must keep some memory of the familiarity they had, just as we think we must do kindness for friends more than for strangers. So also we should accord something to past friends because of the former friendship, whenever it is not excessive badness that causes the dissolution. 4. Self-love and friendship. The defining features of friendship that are found in friendships to one's neighbors would seem to be derived from features of friendship towards oneself. For a friend is taken to be someone who wishes and does goods or apparent goods to his friend for the friend's own sake, or one who wishes the friend to be and to live for the friend's own sake. This is how mothers feel towards their children, and how friends who have been in conflict feel. Others take a friend to be one who spends his time with his friend and makes the same choices, or one who shares his friend's distress and enjoyment. And this also is especially true of mothers, and people define friendship by one of these features. Each of these features is found in the decent person's relation to himself, and in other people insofar as they suppose they are decent, and it would seem, as has been said, that virtue and the excellent person are the standard in each case. For the excellent person is of one mind with himself, and desires the same things in his whole soul. Hence he wishes goods and apparent goods to himself, and achieves them in his actions, since it is proper to the good person to reach the good by his efforts. He wishes and does them for his own sake, since he does them for the sake of his thinking part, and that is what each person seems to be. Moreover, he wishes himself to live and to be preserved, and he wishes this for his rational part most of all. For being is a good for the good person, and each person wishes for goods for himself, and no one chooses to become another person, even if that other will have every good when he has come into being. For, as it is, the God has the good, but no one chooses to be replaced by a God. Rather, each of us chooses goods on condition that he remains whatever he is, and each person would seem to be the understanding part, or that most of all. Hence the good person wishes for goods for the understanding part. Further, such a person finds it pleasant to spend time with himself, and so wishes to do it, for his memories of what he has done are agreeable, and his expectations for the future are good, and hence both are pleasant, and besides, his thought is well supplied with topics for study. Moreover, he shares his own distresses and pleasures more than other people share theirs, for it is always the same thing that is painful or pleasant, not different things at different times. This is because he practically never regrets what he has done. The decent person, then, has each of these features in relation to himself, and he is related to his friend as he is to himself, since the friend is another himself. Hence, friendship seems to be one of these features, and people with these features seem to be friends. But is there friendship towards oneself or not? Let us dismiss that question for the present. However, there seems to be friendship insofar as someone is two or more parts. This seems to be true from what we have said, and because an extreme degree of friendship resembles one's friendship to oneself, the many, base though they are, also appear to have these features. But perhaps they share in them only insofar as they approve of themselves, and suppose they are decent. For no one who is utterly base and unscrupulous either has these features or appears to have them. Indeed, even base people hardly have them, for they are at odds with themselves, and have an appetite for one thing and a wish for another, as incontinent people do. For they do not choose things that seem to be good for them, but instead choose pleasant things that are actually harmful, and cowardice or laziness causes others to shrink from doing what they think best for themselves. And those who have done many terrible actions hate and flee from life because of their vice and destroy themselves. Besides, vicious people seek others to pass their days with and flee from themselves. For when they are by themselves, they remember many disagreeable actions, and anticipate others in the future. But they manage to forget these in other people's company. These people have nothing lovable about them, and so have no friendly feelings for themselves. Hence, such a person does not share his own enjoyments and distresses, for his soul is in conflict, and because he is vicious, one part is distressed at being restrained, and another is pleased by the intended action. And so each part pulls in a different direction, as though they were tearing him apart. Even if he cannot be distressed and pleased at the same time, still he is soon distressed because he was pleased, and wishes these things had not become pleasant to him. For base people are full of regret. Hence the base person appears not to have a friendly attitude even towards himself, because he has nothing lovable about him. If this state is utterly miserable, everyone should earnestly flee from vice and try to be decent, for that is how one will have a friendly relation to oneself and will become a friend to another. 5. Goodwill and friendship. Goodwill would seem to be a feature of friendship, but still it is not friendship, for it arises even towards people we do not know, and without their noticing it, whereas friendship does not. This has also been said before. Nor is it loving, since it lacks intensity and desire, which follow from loving. Moreover, loving requires familiarity, but goodwill can also arise in a moment, as it does, for instance, for contestants, for the spectator acquires goodwill for them, and wants what they want, but would not cooperate with them in any action. For as we said, the goodwill arises in a moment, and the fondness is superficial. Goodwill, then, would seem to be a beginning of friendship, just as pleasure coming through sight is a beginning of erotic passion. For no one has erotic passion for another without previous pleasure in his appearance. But still, one who finds enjoyment in another's appearance does not thereby feel erotic passion for him, but only if he also misses him in his absence and longs for his presence. Similarly, though people cannot be friends without previous goodwill, goodwill does not imply friendship. For when they have goodwill, people only wish goods to the other, and will not cooperate with him in any action, or go to any trouble for him. Hence, we might transfer the name friendship, and say that goodwill is inactive friendship, and that when it lasts some time and they grow accustomed to each other, it becomes friendship. It does not, however, become friendship for utility or pleasure, for these aims do not produce goodwill either. For a recipient of a benefit returns goodwill for what he has received, thereby doing the just thing. But those who wish for another's welfare, because they hope to enrich themselves through him, would seem to have goodwill to themselves, rather than to him. Likewise, they would seem to be friends to themselves rather than to him, if they attend to him because he is of some use to them. And altogether, goodwill results from some sort of virtue and decency, whenever one person finds another to be apparently fine or brave, or something similar. As we said, this also arises in the case of contestants. 6. Friendship and concord. Concord also appears to be a feature of friendship. That is why it is not merely sharing a belief, since this might also happen among people who do not know each other, nor are people said to be in concord when they agree on just anything. On astronomical questions, for instance, since concord on these questions is not a feature of friendship. Rather, a city is to be in concord whenever its citizens agree on what is advantageous, make the same decision, and act on their common resolution. Hence, concord concerns questions for action, and more exactly, large questions where both or all can get what they want. A city, for instance, is in concord whenever all the citizens resolve to make offices elective, or to make an alliance with the Spartans, or to make Pittacus ruler, Pittacus ruler, when he himself was also willing. But whenever each person wants the same thing all to himself, as the people in the Phoenice do, they are in conflict, for it is not concord when each merely has the same thing in mind, whatever it is. Rather, each must also have the same thing in mind for the same person. This is true, for instance, whenever both the common people and the decent party want the best people to rule, since when that is, so both sides get what they seek. Concord, then, is apparently political friendship, as indeed it is said to be, for it is concerned with advantage and with what affects life as a whole. Now, this sort of concord is found in decent people, for they are in concord with themselves and with each other, since they are practically of the same mind, for their wishes are stable, not flowing back and forth like a tidal strait. They wish for what is just and advantageous, and also seek it in common. Base people, however, cannot be in concord, except to a slight degree, just as they can be friends only to a slight degree, for they seek to overreach in benefits to themselves, and shirk labors and public services. And since each wishes this for himself, he interrogates and obstructs his neighbor. For when people do not look out for the common good, it is ruined. The result is that they are in conflict, trying to compel one another, but not wishing to do the just things themselves. 7. Active benevolence and friendship. Benefactors seem to love their beneficiaries more than the beneficiaries love them in return, and this is discussed as though it were an unreasonable thing to happen. In most people's view, this is because the beneficiaries are debtors, and the benefactors are creditors. For the debtor in a loan wishes the creditor did not exist, whereas the creditor even attends to the safety of the debtor. In the same way, then, a benefactor wants the beneficiary to exist because he expects gratitude in return, whereas the beneficiary is not attentive about making the return. Now, Charmis might say that most people say this because they take a bad person's point of view. Still, it would seem to be a human point of view, since the many are indeed forgetful and seek to receive benefits more than to give them. However, it seems that the cause is more proper to human nature, and the case of creditors is not even similar, for they do not love their debtors, but in wishing for their safety, and simply seek repayment. Benefactors, however, love and like their beneficiaries, even if they are of no present or future use to them. The same is true of craftsmen, for each likes his own product more than it would like him if it acquired a soul. Presumably, this is true of poets most of all, since they dearly like their own poems, and are fond of them as though they were their children. The case of benefactors, then, resembles this, for the beneficiary is their product, and hence they like him more than the product likes the producer. The reason for this is that being is choice-worthy and lovable for all, and we are insofar as we are actual, since we are insofar as we live and act. Now the producer is, in a way, the producer in his actuality. Hence the producer is fond of the product because he loves his own being. This is natural, since what he is potentially is what the product indicates in actuality. At the same time, the benefactor's action is fine for him, so that he finds enjoyment in the one whom he acts on. But the one who is acted on finds nothing fine in the agent, but only, at most, some advantage, which is less pleasant and lovable. What is pleasant is actuality in the present, expectation for the future, and memory of the past. But what is pleasantest is the action we do, insofar as we are actual, and this is also most lovable. For the benefactor, then, his product endures, since the fine is long-lasting, but for the person acted on, the useful passes away. Besides, memory of fine things is pleasant, while memory of receiving useful things is not altogether pleasant, or is less pleasant through the reverse, though the reverse would seem to be true for expectation. Moreover, loving is like production, but being loved is like being acted on, and the benefactor's love and friendliness are the result of his greater activity. Further, everyone is fond of whatever has taken effort to produce. For instance, people who have made money themselves are fonder of it than people who have inherited it. And while receiving a benefit seems to take no effort, giving one is hard work. This is also why mothers love their children more than fathers do, or more than children love mothers, since giving birth is more effort for them, and they know better that the children are theirs. And this also would seem to be proper to benefactors. 8. Self-love and selfishness. There is also a puzzle about whether one ought to love oneself most, or someone else. For those who like themselves most are criticized and denounced as self-lovers, as though this were something shameful. Indeed, the base person seems to go to every length for his own sake, and all the more vicious he is. Hence he is accused, for instance, of doing nothing for any end apart from himself. The decent person, on the contrary, acts for the fine, all the more the better he is, and for his friend's sake, disregarding his own interest. The facts, however, conflict with these claims, not unreasonably, for it is said that we must love most the friend who is most a friend, and one is a friend to another most of all if he wishes goods to the other for the other's own sake, even if no one will know about it. But these are features most of all of one's relation to oneself, and so too are all the other defining features of a friend, since it has been said that all the features of friendship extend from oneself to others. All the proverbs agree with this too. Speaking, for instance, of one soul, what friends have is common, equality is friendship, and the knee is closer than the shin. For all these are true most of all in someone's relation with himself, since one is a friend to himself most of all, hence he should also love himself most of all. There is a puzzle then, not surprisingly, about which of these two views we ought to follow, since both inspire some confidence. Presumably then, we must divide these sorts of arguments, and distinguish how far and in what ways those on each side are true. If, then, we grasp how those on each side understand self-love, perhaps it will become clear. Those who make self-love a matter for reproach ascribe it to those who award the biggest share in money, honors, and bodily pleasures to themselves. For the many desire and eagerly pursue these goods, assuming that they are best. That is why they are also contested. Those who overreach for these goods gratify their appetites, and altogether their feelings and the non-rational part of the soul. And this is the character of the many. That is why the application of the term self-love is also derived from the most frequent kind of self-love, which is base. This type of self-lover, then, is justifiably reproached. And plainly those who award themselves these goods are those whom the many habitually call self-lovers. For if someone were always eager above all to do just or temperate actions, or any other actions in accord with the virtues, and in general always gained the fine for himself, no one would call him a self-lover or blame him for it. This sort of person, however, more than the other sort, seems to be a self-lover. At any rate, he awards himself the finest and best things all, and gratifies the most controlling part of himself, obeying it in everything. And just as the most controlling part seems above all others to be a city and every other composite system, the same is true of a human being. Hence, someone loves himself most if he likes and gratifies this part. Similarly, someone is called continent or incontinent because his understanding is or is not the master, on the assumption that this is what each person is. Moreover, his own voluntary actions seem above all to be those that involve reason. Clearly then, this, or this above all, is what each person is. And the decent person likes this most of all. That is why he, most of all, is a self-lover, but a different kind from the one who is reproached. He is superior to him, by as much as the life guided by reason is superior to the life guided by feelings, and as much as desire for the fine is superior to desire for what seems advantageous. Those, then, who are unusually eager to do fine actions are welcomed and praised by everyone. And when everyone strains to achieve the fine and concentrates on the finest actions, everything that is right will be done for the common good, and each person individually will receive the greatest of goods, since that is the character of virtue. And so the good person must be a self-lover, since he will both help himself and benefit others by doing fine actions. But the vicious person must not love himself, since he will harm both himself and his neighbors by following his base feelings. For the vicious person, then, the right actions conflict with those he does. The decent person, however, does the right actions, since all understanding chooses for itself what is best, and the decent person obeys his understanding. It is quite true that, as they say, the excellent person labors for his friends and for his native country, even if he ought to die for them if he must, for he will sacrifice money, honors, and contested goods altogether, achieving the fine for himself. For he will choose intense pleasure for a short time over slight pleasure for a long time, a year of living finally over many years of undistinguished life, and a single fine and great action over many small actions. This is presumably true of one who dies for others. He does indeed choose something great and fine for himself. He is also ready to sacrifice money as long as his friends profit, for the friends gain money while he gains the fine, and so he awards himself the greater good. He treats honors and offices in the same way, for he will sacrifice them all for his friends, since this is fine and praiseworthy for himself. It is not surprising, then, that he seems to be excellent, since he chooses the fine at the cost of everything. It is also possible, however, to sacrifice actions to his friend, since it may be finer to be responsible for his friends doing the action than to do it himself. In everything praiseworthy, then, the excellent person evidently awards himself more of the fine. In this way, then, we ought to be self-lovers, as we have said, but in the way the many are, we ought not to be. 9. Why do we need friends? There is also a dispute about whether the happy person will need friends or not. For it is said that blessedly happy and self-sufficient people have no need of friends, for they already have all the goods, and hence being self-sufficient, need nothing added. But one's friend, since he is another oneself, supplies what one's own efforts cannot supply. Hence it is said, when the God gives well, what need is there of friends? It would seem strange, however, to award the happy person all the goods, without giving him friends, which seems to be the greatest external good. And if it is more proper to a friend to confer benefits than to receive them, and it is proper to the good person and to virtue to do good, and it is finer to benefit friends than to benefit strangers, the excellent person will need people to benefit. Indeed, that is why there is a question about whether friends are needed more in good fortune than in ill fortune, on the assumption that in ill fortune we need people to benefit us, and in good fortune we need others for us to benefit. And presumably it is also strange to make the blessed person solitary, for no one would choose to have all other goods and yet be alone, since a human being is a political animal that tends by nature to live together with others. This will also be true, then, of the happy person, for he has the natural goods, and clearly it is better to spend his days with decent friends than with strangers of any old character. Hence the happy person needs friends. Then what are those on the other side saying, and on what point are they correct? Perhaps they say what they say, because the many think that the useful people are friends. Now certainly the blessedly happy people will have no need of these, since he has all goods. Similarly, he will have no need or very little of friends for pleasure, for since his life is pleasant, it has no needs of imported pleasure. Since he does not need these sorts of friends, he seems not to need friends at all. This conclusion, however, is presumably not true, for we said at the beginning that happiness is a kind of activity, and clearly activity comes into being, and does not belong to someone all the time, as a possession does. Now if being happy consists in living and being active, the activity of the good person is excellent, and hence pleasant in itself. As we said at the beginning, what is our own is also pleasant, and we are able to observe our neighbors more than ourselves, and to observe their actions more than our own. It follows that a good person finds pleasure in the actions of excellent people who are his friends. Since these actions have both the naturally pleasant features, they are good, and they are his own. The blessed person, therefore, will need virtuous friends, given that he decides to observe virtuous actions that are his own. And the actions of a virtuous person who is his friend are of this sort. Further, it is thought that the happy person must live pleasantly. Now a solitary person's life is hard, since it is not easy for him to be continuously active all by himself, but in relation to others, and in their company it is easier. Hence his activity will be more continuous. It is also pleasant in itself, as it must be in the blessedly happy person's case. For the excellent person, insofar as he is excellent, enjoys actions in accord with virtue, and objects to actions caused by vice. And objects to actions caused by vice, just as the musician enjoys fine melodies and is pained by bad ones. Further, good people's life together allow the cultivation of virtue, as Diogenes says. If we examine the question more from the point of view of human nature, an excellent friend would seem to be choice-worthy by nature for an excellent person. For, as we have said, what is good by nature is good and pleasant in itself for an excellent person. For animals, life is defined by the capacity for perception, but for human beings, it is defined by the capacity for perception or understanding. Moreover, every capacity refers to an activity, and a thing is present fully in its activity, hence living fully would seem to be perceiving or understanding. Now, life is good and pleasant in itself, for it has definite order, which is proper to the nature of what is good. What is good by nature is also good for the decent person. That is why life would seem to be pleasant for everyone. But we must not consider a life that is vicious and corrupted or filled with pains, for such a life lacks definite order, just as its proper features do. The truth about pain will be more evident in what follows. Life itself, then, is good and pleasant, as it would seem. At any rate, from the fact that everyone desires it, and decent and blessed, people desire it more than others do, for their life is most choice-worthy for them, and their living is most blessed. Now someone who sees perceives that he sees, one who hears perceives that he hears, one who walks perceives that he walks. And similarly in the other cases, also there is some part that perceives that we are active, so that if we are perceiving, we perceive that we are perceiving, and if we are understanding, we perceive that we are understanding. Now perceiving that we are perceiving or understanding is the same as perceiving that we are, since we saw that being is perceiving or understanding. Perceiving that we are alive is pleasant in itself, for life is by nature a good, and it is pleasant to perceive that something good is present in us. Living is also choice-worthy, for a good person most of all, since being is good and pleasant for him, he is pleased to perceive something good in itself together with his own being. The excellent person is related to his friend in the same way as he is related to himself, since a friend is another himself. Therefore, just as his own being is choice-worthy for him, his friend's being is choice-worthy for him in the same or a similar way. We saw that someone's own being is choice-worthy because he perceives that he is good, and this sort of perception is pleasant in itself. He ought, then, to perceive his friends being together with his own, and he will do this when they live together. That is to say, they share conversation and thought. For in the case of human beings, what seems to count as living together is the sharing of conversation and thought, not sharing the same pasture as in the case of grazing animals. If, then, for the blessedly happy person, being is choice-worthy, since it is naturally good and pleasant, and if the being of his friend is closely similar to his own, his friend will also be choice-worthy. What is choice-worthy for him, he ought to possess, since otherwise he will in this respect lack nothing. Anyone who is to be happy, then, will need excellent friends. 10. How many friends are needed? Then, should we make as many friends as possible? Or is it the same as with the friendship of host and guest, where it seems to be good advice to have neither many nor none? Is this also good advice in friendship, to have neither no friends nor excessively many? With friends for utility, the advice seems very apt, since it is hard work to return many people's services, and one's life is insufficient for it. Indeed, more friends of this type than are adequate for one's own life are superfluous, and a hindrance to living finely. Hence we have no need of them. A few friends for pleasure are enough, also just as a little seasoning on food is enough. Of excellent people, however, should we have as many as possible friends, or is there some proper measure of their number as of the number in a city? For a city cannot be formed from 10 people, but it would be a city no longer if it had 100,000. Presumably, though, the right quantity is not just one number, but anything between certain defined limits. Hence, there is also some limit defining the number of friends. Presumably, this is the largest number with whom one could live together, since we found that living together seems to be most characteristic of friendship. Now, clearly one cannot live with many people and distribute oneself among them. Further, these many people must also be friends to one another. If they are all to spend their days together, and this is hard work for many people to manage, it also proves to be difficult for many to share one another's enjoyments and distresses as their own, since one is quite likely to find oneself sharing one's friend's pleasure and another friend's grief at the same time. Presumably, then, it is good not to seek as many friends as possible, and it is good to have no more than enough for living together. Indeed, it even seems impossible to be an extremely close friend to many people. That is why it also seems impossible to be passionately in love with many people, since passionate erotic love tends to be an excess of friendship, and one has this for one person. Hence also one has extremely close friendship for a few people. This would seem to be borne out in what people actually do, for the friendship of companions is not found in groups of many people, and the friendships celebrated in song are always between two people. By contrast, those who have many friends and treat everyone as close to them seem to be friends to no one, except in the way fellow citizens are friends. Indeed, these people are said to be ingratiating. Certainly, it is possible to have a fellow citizen's friendship from many people, and still to be a truly decent person, not ingratiating. But it is impossible to be many people's friend, for their virtue and for themselves. We have reason to be satisfied if we can find even a few such friends. 11. Friends in good and ill fortune. Do we need friends more in good fortune or in ill fortune? For in fact we seek them in both. For in ill fortune we need assistance, and in good fortune we need friends to live with and to benefit, since then we wish to do good to them. Certainly it is more necessary to have friends in ill fortune. That is why useful friends are needed here. But it is finer to have them in good fortune. That is why we also seek decent friends, for it is more choiceworthy to do good to them and spend our time with them. The very presence of friends is also pleasant in ill fortune as well as good fortune, for we have our pain lightened when our friends share our distress. Indeed, that is why one might be puzzled about whether they take a part of the pain from us, as though helping us to lift the weight, or alternatively, their presence is pleasant and our awareness that they share our distress makes the pain smaller. Well, we need not discuss whether it is this or something else that lightens our pain at any rate. What we have mentioned does appear to occur. In fact, however, the presence of friends would seem to be a mixture of pleasure and pain. For certainly the sight of our friends in itself is pleasant, especially when we are in ill fortune, and it gives us some assistance in removing our pain, for a friend consoles us by the sight of him and by conversation. If he is dexterous, since he knows our character and what gives us pleasure and pain. Nonetheless, awareness of his pain at our ill fortune is painful to us, for everyone tries to avoid causing pain to his friends. That is why someone with a manly nature tries to prevent his friend from sharing his pain. Unless he is unusually immune to pain, he cannot endure pain coming to his friends, and he does not allow others to share his mourning at all, since he is not prone to mourn himself either. Females, however, and effeminate men enjoy having people to well with them. They love them as friends who share their distress, but in everything we clearly must imitate the better person. In good fortune, by contrast, the presence of friends makes it pleasant to pass our time, and to notice that they take pleasure in our own goods. That is why it seems that we must eagerly call our friends to share our good fortune, since it is fine to do good, but we must hesitate to call them to share our ill fortune, since we must share bad things with them as little as possible. Hence the saying, "My misfortune is enough." We should invite them, most of all, whenever they will benefit us greatly, with little trouble to themselves. Conversely, it is presumably appropriate to go eagerly without having to be called, to friends in misfortune, for it is proper to a friend to benefit, especially to benefit a friend in need who has not demanded it. Since this is finer and pleasanter for both friends, in good fortune one should come eagerly to help him, since friends are needed for this also. But one should be slow to come to receive benefits, since eagerness to be benefited is not fine. Presumably, though, one should avoid getting a reputation for being a killjoy, as sometimes happens by refusing benefits. Hence, the presence of friends is apparently choice-worthy in all conditions. 12. Shared activity and friendship. What the erotic lover likes most is the sight of his beloved, and this is the sort of perception he chooses over the others, on the assumption that this above all is what makes him fall in love and remain in love. In the same way, surely, what friends find most choice-worthy is living together. For friendship is community, and we are related to our friend as we are related to ourselves. Hence, since the perception of our own being is choice-worthy, so is the perception of our friend's being. Perception is active when we live with him. Hence, not surprisingly, this is what we seek. So, whatever someone regards as his being or the end for which he chooses to be alive, that is the activity he wishes to pursue in his friend's company. Hence, some friends drink together, others play dice, while others do gymnastics and go hunting or do philosophy. They spend their days together on whichever pursuit in life they like most, for since they want to live with their friends, they share the actions in which they find their common life. Hence, the friendship of base people turns out to be vicious, for they are unstable and share base pursuits, and by becoming similar to each other, they grow vicious. But the friendship of decent people is decent and increases the more often they meet, and they seem to become still better from their activities and their mutual correction, for each molds the other in what they approve of, so that you will learn what is noble from noble people. So much then for friendship. The next task will be to discuss pleasure. And that is the end of Book 9.